All right, welcome everyone to the Digital Transformation Room. I'm Sam Perrell. I'm going to be your moderator for today, and introducing Eric Enge.
Enge. You got it.
Nice.
Yes.
Okay, so Eric's been speaking about digital marketing for more than 2 decades. He has keynoted in many conferences, including PubCon Las Vegas, State of Search Dallas, which is us, and Next 10X. Eric is lead co-author of The Art of SEO, which is in its 4th edition, released this August.
Yes.
And also provides content to sites such as Search Engine Land and Moz. Eric is particularly well known for the research that he publishes on key aspects of search. Eric was named the 2018 Search Personality of the Year at the Drum Search Awards, 2016 Search Marketer of the Year at the Landies, 2016 Search Personality of the Year at the US Search Awards, and Stone Temple Consulting was also named the Best Large SEO Agency of the Year at the US Search Awards. And happy to introduce, and please welcome Eric Enge.
Thank you. He mentioned Stone Temple Consulting. Just so you know, sold that company in 2018. Spent 3 years in indentured servitude to the acquiring company. And as I explained, at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on July 16, 2021, 3 years to the second after I accepted that 3-year obligation, I ended that indentured servitude. So back on my own. So, and I'm just a solo practitioner now. All right. So just a little bit of an introduction to this. I am going to talk about some real-world case studies and share actual measured levels of ROI from implementing AI in specific places in your ecosystem. But I want to just give a little context first. First of all, we need to remember how this stuff is trained. As far as I know, OpenAI never actually specifically said what the data sources were for GPT-4, but like GPT-3, it's reasonable to assume that it's the open internet. And that's a good thing because all the world's information is there. But it's also a bad thing because all the world's misinformation is there too. And it has trouble teasing those differences out. And this is one of the driving sources behind the errors that we get. And I know everybody in industry likes to call them hallucinations. You know what? They're just errors. They screwed up. They got it wrong. So that's just sort of my perspective on that part of it. But another one of the things is when you realize how this stuff is trained, it's basically munging language. That's why it's called a large language model across the internet, and then learning how to distill that into something where it could arguably dispense some level of knowledge, which is hopefully right an okay percentage of the time. But with all of that, it has no context for all that data. It has no internal model of the real world. It doesn't understand where or how people perceive things. So, and what someone might be looking for. And this is actually one of the most important parts in working well with these language models, is recognizing this shortcoming and doing the right things to minimize their impact. So one of the most popular things we talk about is using AI to help create content. And so the challenge, the prior speaker actually talked a little bit about Google's stance on this and how Google has softened their stance. And as long as it's good content, they don't care how you generated it. But the reality is, to fit that definition of good content, you can't just regurgitate what's already on the internet. It still needs to have your expertise and insight as a part of it, at some level contain your unique POV or experience. By the way, you can potentially train those things into a custom GPT, for example. But if you don't put these kinds of things into it, then you're inevitably going to have problems. So you're just looking at the history of this. Here's CNET, actually had published 71 different AI-generated articles providing financial advice. They found that 41 of them had significant errors when they did a detailed review. Now, mind you, they had already published it, and they pushed it out there, and they had to pull it back. So 41 out of 71 doesn't seem like particularly good odds if it's your brand that's depending on how users out there perceive the quality of your content and your messaging and the relationship that you are trying to build with them. Now, this one is a little bit older. It's earlier in the year, but here's another example, which is more recent. August 28th, 23, Gannett newspaper had been using AI-generated content to actually produce sports score summaries. And this is one of the kinds of things that you see in AI-generated content that we don't really talk about that much because it's not actually an error. But it refers here to the sports score. Westville Central got beaten 21-12 in a close encounter of the athletic kind. Okay, so that's not a factual error, but it still doesn't fly, right? So these are the kinds of things you have to watch for. One thing I don't have an example for, but I do want to also mention is there's a third thing to worry about too, which is significant omissions. And it worries me that we don't talk about this. Almost no one talks about this aspect of AI-generated content. So yes, there's the factual errors, and they talk about the language problems. But if you're giving someone insurance advice or something along those lines, and you forget to include critical information, okay, it's not an overt error, but it's just as bad. So again, you need to be watching out for those kinds of things. So a previous speaker actually talked a little bit about where we are in terms of the evolution of this stuff. It's interesting. This is data from a study that was published by Spark Turo. The data was sourced by a company called Datos or Datos. I don't know how they pronounce it. But in any case, between May and July of 2023, OpenAI saw a little bit of a traffic drop. I haven't seen data that's extended out since then, but there's a phenomenon that I'll talk about more in a minute, which is, you have this surge of, AI is here, the revolution has come, and it happens with all market disruptive events. It happened with the internet. The previous speaker mentioned, 1995, back when the internet was raging, and of course, it had the big crash in 2000. It happened with things like speech recognition. It happened with social media, all these things where everybody expects that the world has changed dramatically, and then sort of reality sets in. So this doesn't mean it's going away. I'm not suggesting that. I wouldn't be talking about this up here if I believed that. But if you look at that same study, it was really interesting to see where they saw the most usage happening. And this is across just over 4,000 queries that they sampled. And nearly 30% of them were being used for programming. It was the #1 use case for people on ChatGPT. And it turns out, by the way, it's actually a pretty good use case for generative AI technology. And ChatGPT is pretty good at it. You can't just have it write the code and walk away with it, you're done. But we're all better editors than we are starting with a blank sheet of paper and figuring out where we want to go with things. And there's a lot that can be done from a programming perspective. I'm not going to talk any more about that. I'm just sharing it because it was interesting. But 20% of the time was content, and presumably, the SEO related stuff. A lot of that was on the content side, and then some on the programming side for people who are trying to use it for things like generate hreflang and schema tags and stuff like that. And it's actually pretty good at that stuff. But so here is the Gartner hype cycle. It's a famous model for what happens with disruptive events. There's sort of this initial trigger where suddenly everybody gets extremely excited, and you have this huge rush of excitement, and then it sort of cools off a little bit. And I've said on this chart that we're on the just past the peak. The earlier speaker, the one before me, suggested perhaps we're even on the other side of the peak. He wasn't showing this chart, but his reference to 1995 suggests we haven't hit the peak. I don't necessarily disagree with him. My point is we haven't gotten to that point, which we call the slope of enlightenment, which is where we all actually figure out how to run with it, right? So we're getting there. So summarizing the challenges. Error rates, emissions, language issues, as I mentioned, iteration on what you're trying to do with your prompt generation, which involves human intervention, and other levels of human intervention is what's required. So that doesn't mean we can't get gains out of using generative AI. There's a lot of different ways you can potentially do that. So I'm going to talk about some of those. But getting started can be challenging. And what is important is that you figure out how to get started. Let's not try to use an old phrase to boil the ocean the first time you get out and start doing stuff with AI. But actually figure out some good tactical ways to get engaged and start building expertise through your organization. So a prior speaker talked about, for example, don't hire a prompt engineer, make everybody do it. And he made a good point, which is that it's just like search queries were in the late 90s. Not everybody was good at doing great search queries, right? But everybody in your organization needs to have some level of skill at it. But still, you have to get started. You have to start building that organizational IQ. Very, very important. So I'm just going to share an example, and I'm deliberately actually starting with Claude 2 AI. Not because it's inherently better than ChatGPT. It's better than ChatGPT at some things, and not as good at other things. But one of the things that I wanted to try is because Claude 2 is good at allowing you to supply a lot of attachments and very large amount of data at a level that's far beyond what ChatGPT can do. So this is something that I've been experimenting with, and it's a fictitious example, but I've actually done this at some organizations, is used database structures for something like 100 locations for a business, and then use the generative AI tool to spit out different blurbs of content for each of the locations, and make those different blurbs of content not look like they're poured straight from the same template over and over again. It takes a lot of effort to get there, and I'm going to show you only a part of what I did, because in the example, I didn't take it all the way through to completion, but you'll see some of the challenges. So here's the original prompt. I wanted it to rephrase the following paragraph, which is what you see in the two paragraphs below, actually, for 3 different locations, but avoid repetition. So it just didn't read the same over and over again while keeping the same meaning. So that was the initial prompt. I also gave this information, which is the database of information. So in this example, just the address, hours, and date and hours, and that was pretty much it. Your database will probably be a lot more complex. But anyway, I wanted to see what it would do with this prompt. So it came back and gave me 3 versions. I'm only showing 2 of them here, because if I tried to put all 3 of them on there, you wouldn't be able to read it. But you'll see there's some variation in the text. But the problem is, in this version, it's literally taking the original example text I gave it and taking each concept and repeated it in exactly the same order. So the structure is a little too repetitive. it's fairly easily recognizable as machine generated. So I want to put a little more effort into it. So I then asked, I'd like more variety in the descriptions. So please consider this paragraph and then be a bit more creative in your wording. So I gave it a second paragraph, sample, or it's really 2 paragraphs, sample text to use. So now it has 2 templates. This was the second set of results. And it started introducing words like howdy and yeehaw and other things that I wasn't working for. Nothing wrong with howdy, by the way, but I personally don't say yeehaw too often. Cowabunga is in here. Because I didn't do a great job, it kind of just replaced the first template with the second template. So then I tried another cut, said, please mix and match between the first template I gave you and the second one, and exclude the before you say and before you have time to say things, so I could get the weird quoted words out of the draft. And it gave me a third set of stuff. So here, it still has, it's a little better, but it still has some problems that needs work. So the point of my showing you this example is to give you some idea of what you need to do and what you need to go through to iterate to get to a place where you have a model that works. So for those of you who saw the prior speaker, one of his points that he made, which is a really good one, is, don't start from scratch every time, right? So save your prior conversations, or in today's world, build a GPT for yourself that you train and knows how to do these things that you can improve over time, and get this so it's getting the variety that you want. And if you work hard enough at this and give it enough information and enough variables, it can do a pretty good job. So I do mention OpenAI's new GPT builder. I'm sharing an example here, which I just took from VentureBeat. But this was something, example is it's, okay, yeah, it's doing an email text, want to read the copy of an email and presents you with the questions and tries to use it to generate a response. And so the idea is similar to what I just showed you using Claude 2. You just go through this process of iterating it until you get it working the way you want. But the beauty of this is then you can save it, right? And you can use it over and over again. And you've built an asset. So it's a pretty cool thing. But with that little bit of context, ultimately, we want to understand these things before you start. You got to set the right goal, right? If your goal is, I want to increase my content throughput by 10x, just stop, okay? You're reaching for the moon. You will not be able to do a good job with that. So, and it's a bit flaky. We just have to get over it. We have to learn to work with it and deal with the issues. So this is a little bit of an exaggeration here, but it's like using a random number generator to generate your content, right? I mean, it's better than that. It's a little bit unfair characterization, but there's an element of that in here that emerges, and that's where the problems come from. But we want to use it for its strengths. And the strengths that generative AI has are considerable, and then correct for its weaknesses. And there's ways to do that. And then pick the platform that works for you. I'm just showing 2 here. ChatGPT 4, 1.76 trillion parameters versus Claude 2 AI, only 130 billion. So presumably that means ChatGPT 4 has a much broader, deeper knowledge base, which it does. And other advantages, disadvantages. These things impact what the best applications are for you. And similarly, by the way, there's other things like within ChatGPT 4, one of the plugins might actually be better for you than just the base platform. But anyway, let's look at some case studies. First, there's a company that I sit on the board of called study.com. So I've got a few examples from them here. One of the things that's pretty cool that it can do is database optimizations. And the reason why I'm sharing the example is that we used a database to generate a new information architecture for the site. And that's why it proves to be an SEO type task. The company is an education platform. They offer courses and lessons and study help to people. And it's actually, it gets 40 million visitors a month, so it's pretty good traffic. But prior to AI optimizations, in order to organize this IA, what the company had done has manually built an IA database structure for the company. And by the way, it's like 75,000 pages, 90,000 pages they were trying to organize. And the process, because it's like essentially all academic information that they offer on their site, they're trying to organize into a clean hierarchy. The problem is that it resulted in many errors that need to be found, right? And it's very difficult to do manually, have human go through and generate this. So we needed a cost-effective approach for optimizing the IA database. So just to give you an idea of the database organization, there are 6 levels from C0 to C5. Like I said, 90 some odd thousand pages. And the issue is that the errors scaled as database size and complexity grew. And so the goal was to use AI to validate the connections. So one of the first things to do was take the 2 bottom parts of each part of the tree. You just look at the C4 node, which is the second to last node, and the C5 node, and then use ChatGPT to validate that the C5 pages have the right C4 parents. And then you could repeat other levels up the chain. And so this was very effective in finding a number of problems. It's actually a really good application for ChatGPT. And then the next one was to take the C5 level and make sure it had the right, it was like in the right general category. Like a C0 category here might be science or math or history, right? And make sure those connections were good. And it did a really good job at that. And then the category optimization actually had orphans. So we wanted to go through the process of making sure that we had found homes for them and use ChatGPT to do that as well. Now, all of these things were expensive to do manually, relatively speaking. To give you an idea of the impact, it was about $12 per item to resolve for a human. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you've got 10,000 of these things to do, it ends up not only costing a lot, it takes a lot of time, a lot of calendar time. Using AI, we got that down to about $3 an item. So that was a 4-to-1 gain. So that was really quite good. Favorite topic for everyone, content outline generation. So the goals we talked about for this before we started, and remember I talked about picking the right goals. We wanted to use it to generate content outlines, but we had 3 goals for it. Reduce costs, improve quality, and improve throughput. Now, the second of those goals, the improve quality, is the thing that prevents you from going nuts with improving throughput. Right. So like I said, do I want to increase my throughput by 10 times? Probably not. Right. But I might be able to double my throughput, increase my quality by 25%, and drop my cost by half or something like that. If you can get that to work for you, that's a home run. And this is something you can do with this technology right now. So here was the idea very generally. request an outline from ChatGPT, get the response, edit the outline, and then provide the outline to writers or editors to take from there. So that was the general idea. We actually evolved it to the point where we started generating 3 outlines and then having the editors smush those 3 outlines together. Because the problem with generating 1 is there might be important subtopics omitted. So that's one of the reasons why you don't want to just do that. So here's an example prompt for that. Yeah, it's moderately complex, but important things in the prompt, provide context. Just as prior speaker made a similar point, you want to provide context for the tool so it understands and also what's the size of the piece, who's the target audience, what's your role, these kinds of things. Much detail as you can. It's very helpful. So, and we also provided 2 examples of outlines as templates. So it could understand the structure we were looking for in the outline, and a list of other relevant related keywords. And all of that was used to guide the tool. So in this one, estimated cost previously to generate the outline was being done with knowledgeable writers, but in the Philippines, we're generating outlines. So it was $10 an outline. But once again, we get that cost down to about $3 using ChatGPT. So it was pretty good. Next up, titles and meta descriptions. Here, this is actually a friend of mine, Steve Hammer, has an agency called Rank Hammer. And this one is from him. Prior to their AI modifications, the site was focused on lead gen and had about 1,500 pages they wanted to target for optimization. So the process used was roughly as follows. They built a queue of 1,500 pages to optimize, and they analyzed them in blocks of 10, and they used ChatGPT-4 with the current title and the first paragraph of the page to generate new descriptions, and then a human review to check it, and then updates were published to the site. So pretty straightforward. And Steve Hammer, whose agency did this, reported these results. The CTR before they optimized was about 3.3%, went up to about 3.7%. So about a 12% gain. Not too bad, right? I'll take that. And then striking distance optimizations. This is actually a case study from SEO Clarity. So the situation here is the Drizzly, largest online alcohol vendor, wanted to test a month's worth of content produced using SEO Clarity's AI content fusion feature and compare that with content produced without the tool. So what they did is they analyzed on-page content for competitors for the target keyword, and they reported on the most important terms to include. And then they did some calculations of, what's the weight you should put on each of these topics, and what does that suggest about how often you might mention a phrase. You want to be careful here that you don't get too mechanical about mentioning phrases exact numbers of times, but it's really meant to put relative weight on each topic area. And then it provided recommendations for title, meta description, content outline, and some suggested paragraphs that you would need to include. So here's an example of what it looks like. It's probably a little hard to read, but you have sample keywords here, and over here, things that you want to talk about. Suggested intro or elements for the intro. Really, it's not the intro itself, and things to include in the paragraph. And they compared the content generated without their tool versus content generated with their tool. And they actually saw nearly double impact in terms of traffic. to it. So it got a really strong result. The opportunities, there's so many different ones. It's like you can do content brief generation, draft content brief generation, draft content creation, the templated content generation I showed you, scale that. Facts and stats for articles. If you have an article you've already written about something and you want to get extra things to quote or sources to reference, then ask ChatGPT to give you extra facts and statistics. It does a great job at that. Summarizing content. Claude 2 AI, by the way, is probably the best at summarizing content. You can take a whole large-scale PDF and give it to them, and in a minute, you'll have a really pretty good summary of that back. You can do quick auditing of pages for SEO. You have to submit the page, or use Bing Chat. But anyway, so many different things. Schema, hreflang, HT access code, robust.txt. You do need to check all these things before you're done. So expert crafting of prompts to your AI platform to increase chances of success. Subject matter expert human review of the output before taking action. And then pre-training or templates or your own data or context. These are all things you need to provide. One last thing I want to share with you is this idea of a content development process more fully mapped out. So first, even before you get to an outline, you can use your generative AI tool to generate content ideas, right? And then before you go anywhere with that, do an editorial review of that, and see what you want to keep and what you want to get rid of, and then generate the article outlines. Go back to the AI, generate the article outlines. Like I said, I like generating 3. Do an editorial merge of the outlines, clean them up. Then create content drafts. Again, you might create multiple drafts, and then edit the content drafts and publish. So this process actually works fairly well. That last editorial stage right here, you have to be very, very careful about that one, because it's the point at which it could all blow up on you if you don't really have someone who knows the topic reviewing it. And I'm a big fan of having that subject matter expert who takes on that stage, put their name on the article. It's good eat, W-E-A-T. First of all, do that. And now they're on the hook for the quality of it. They'll read it more carefully when their name is on it, right? And you really want them to do that. That's what I got. Questions?
I love the fact piece. So I was testing Longshot, and they have a fact GPT kind of set up in there. It says the same sort of citation sourcing. It's kind of a neat way to augment what you're doing in ChatGPT.
Yeah, it is really neat. It's surprising how good that is. And the fact that it gives you the sources. If you need to build an article and take an article you've built and make it that much better by citing third-party people, yeah, it's an excellent way to do that fast. Yeah, absolutely.
It seems like in the near future, a lot of people would be kind of getting behind if they weren't using AI to write content. So can we expect that most content in maybe a year is going to be written with AI?
Yeah, that's a good question. I said it before, and I'll reiterate. If your organization hasn't started, just start. Just build your IQ for sure. How far you'll be able to go with it is a tough question, and the problem is that when we think about the errors and the omissions and the language issues and all those things, people have it in their minds that in 6 months, the AI will have evolved at a point where all that has been resolved and now it's going to be perfect or something. It's not true. It's going to take something different. Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, co-founder of OpenAI himself, said that with GPT-4, we had reached the logical limit of what you could accomplish with a large language model, and that new approaches were going to be needed to take things to the next stage. And the problem is you can't just crowdsource away the errors. It's not that simple. I had a conversation with a Google employee about this. I won't name them, but we were talking about it. And I mean, the number of errors that it has the potential to make, we're talking trillions. You know, you're not going to get 10,000 people reporting an error a month. You know, you're not going to climb that curve that fast. And if there's things inherent in the way that it operates that could cause it to go back and create the same error, even if you try to train that piece out. So that said, some level of AI assistance, if you aren't using it substantively in a year, you will be behind economically and probably quality-wise from what people can do that are leveraging it. So.
When do we get to use your local AI content spinner?
We'll talk privately later. All right.
I'd like to note on the 18, I've seen some websites, they have an author byline, and then they have a review by, and then fact check by, and then they have review committees. And so just increasing the bylines, I think is probably where a lot of editorial content's going to go. But I want to ask about the Claude 2, and that can help attachments. Can you speak a little bit more on that, like what attachments you can upload if there's any restrictions on formats?
There are. I apologize, I don't know the whole list. Certainly PDF files is one of the more popular ones. I just yesterday uploaded a Google white paper, which I refer to as the messy middle white paper. That's a whole nother conversation. Very cool white paper, by the way. But it's a fairly large document, and asked it to give me a summary of that, and it cranked it out in less than a minute. So there's a lot of different formats that it will take. I don't think it takes Excel directly. Brett? There you go. Yeah. Yeah, up to 10 meg in size, which is, you know, awesome way. That's why for something like content summarization or this idea of taking this database of locations, or it doesn't have to be locations, but database of things, and creating a lot of related pages that don't read like copies of each other. It's just going to be much better at that than ChatGPT, right? There was a question in the back.
Speed, quality, and cost, which can only pick 2 of the 3, right? It's a classic paradigm. It seems like sometimes you were able to hit on all 3, depending on the task at hand. Is that fair? How would you use that analogy to try and talk about this?
It does seem like I'm cheating, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing is that in all of the things created equal, yes, you can't, generally speaking, impact all 3 of those things at once. But now what you've done by introducing AI is you've sort of shifted the paradigm a bit. So you're leveraging a tool which has a vast array of knowledge available, which enables you to get inordinate, you know, just sort of a different landscape for what kind of gains you can get. So in the experimentation we've done, I mentioned the company that I'm on the board of, study.com. We're doing stuff with this where we believe we are getting better input for our subject matter experts to take the suggested piece of content or outline or whatever and take it to the next stage. Because, so simple example, if I were to ask a subject matter expert to create an outline of something, any topic, let's say Newtonian physics. And they put a whole bunch of things down. And then if you got 3 outlines handed to you by the AI, which takes almost no time to generate, the same thing, the subject matter expert is going to find that they omitted something. Now, mind you, it's not because they're stupid, it's just hard to begin with a blank piece of paper, right? So that by itself is something that will allow it to be more robust. They'll also get out of the gate faster if they're working with those outlines, because again, they're not starting with that blank sheet of paper, right? So it does, to my view, and from our experimentation, it does seem like as long as you're not too greedy with the scale of each one, that you can dip into 3 buckets at once.
Just based on all the conversations I'm hearing around AI over the years, months, et cetera, it seems like, especially with just general written content, it's going to help shrink teams on marketing teams, and they can pivot and hire more people or have people to do more video, which is supposedly was the next frontier a while ago, but nobody's doing, right? And AI is going to get there at some point for video more and more as well. It's just interesting to see, like, a lot of people are scared of using it, or saying everybody's going to use it, but maybe it's just going to push us to say, well, okay, there's the written content, but now let's start focusing on video content.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is for people who have been doing content generation at scale, there's an interesting dynamic, because a lot of those organizations are actually trying to punch out, 1,000 pieces a month or something, right? You have NerdWallet and folks like that that are at that scale, but a lot of other companies doing it. So arguably, they'll begin to use AI to do a lot more of that, but they're going to have a lot more pressure to have real subject matter experts doing the final review, rather than because the reliability of a person who knows a topic pretty well is probably better than a ChatGPT generated thing or a generative AI generated thing, which knows the topic extremely well, but it also knows all the things that it shouldn't say, and it says them anyway.
Was it
So
Bloomberg that got in trouble for that? You were doing, like, nobody wants to write about financial stuff, and blah, blah, blah. They had AI doing it, and they got called out on it. So now they have to have, like, written by AI, reviewed by an editor.
Yeah, very, very important. So there actually could be an increased premium on the level of subject matter experts you employ, because depending on where you go with the process. Because at the end, it's this one of the most important things I can say. You have to own the quality of your output, no matter how you produce it, because it's your company name on that thing, right? It's your brand that's at stake. And for the video side, by the way, that's not necessarily that far behind. I did an exercise. Gosh, I wish I remember the tool, but there was a tool I went into, and I uploaded like a 3-minute video of me saying something, and then I told the tool to give it back to me in French, and it did. It gave it back to me in French. I picked French because I know enough to be dangerous. I wouldn't say I speak it, but I could at least. And it adjusted the movement of my lips to fit the spoken French words. That's commercially available right now, right? So yeah, we'll see where that goes. I mean, we don't have to get into all the scary stuff. There's plenty of that too, because there's going to be videos released of you, saying something, and it ain't you, right? And shocking thought. Any other questions? Too anxious to get a drink? All right, thank you.